Well, we are in a little short series on the parables of Jesus that he told. And my hope today is that this parable, the parable of the vineyard, is going to be helpful in seeing a bigger picture of our faith. Something that we don't always do. We don't always take the step back and look at the forest instead of the trees. You know, we're oftentimes kind of caught in there. But I don't know about you, but it's really difficult for me to really accept or embrace something or be a part of something until I understand the big picture. You know, the big picture is always helpful for me. And just a quick little example, when I was in college, I had a co-op job at Lockheed. I don't know if they still do co-oping, but anyway, I had a co-op job at Lockheed as they're an airplane manufacturer on the suburbs of Atlanta and Marietta, or as they say up there, Marietta. But anyway, at Georgia Tech, which is where I went to college, we were on a quarter system. And so every other quarter, I would work at a different department at Lockheed. I'd go to school, then go to work at a department, and then go back to school, et cetera, et cetera. I got to work in some really cool departments like aerodynamics and jet propulsion and robotics, and my least favorite, the stress group. There was a group called the stress group. It had nothing to do with feeling stress. It had everything to do. It was a group that basically ensured that the airplane didn't fall apart when it was in mid-flight. That was a very important group, one that we're glad that is there. However, all they did all day long, all the engineers, and I became one of them, we were in this like big open room with desks stacked, right beside each other, just row after row of engineers and stuff. And all they would do is do these load calculations on different airplane parts all day. Not what my dream of being an engineer really looked like, but sometimes you work at a place like that and you get to find out more of what you don't want to do than what you do want to do, and that was true. Anyway, one quarter, I worked, again, like I said, in the jet propulsion group. Really liked that group. And I mean, you're working with jet engines. I mean, these are powerful machines. I mean, jet engines, to get an airplane off the ground is pretty fascinating, pretty amazing. And so I was working in that group, and we were looking at this new design. It was a special project that I got assigned to work on this. It sounded really super cool. It's called the supercritical inlet, all right? I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about it, but there was virtually no expense. When you worked at Lockheed, it was under government contract. There was virtually no expense that wasn't available to us. I mean, we had the most expensive computers. It's the first place that I saw a PC. It's a Mac, and I mean, back in the early 80s, and so very, very early on, getting to see that, but also had these massive computers in a whole room that's about, does what probably your phone does, but they were massive, but they were expensive and did all kinds of computations and stuff, but no expense was spared and stuff. And so I was fired up about the whole deal and this project that I was on, until I got talking to the lead engineer, and we kind of sat back and stuff, and I said, listen, I'm so happy about this, but tell me what this is going to do. What's the benefit of this supercritical inlet design that we're working so feverishly on? And he very enthusiastically, which is interesting, but he very enthusiastically looked at me and he said, if everything goes perfect, if everything does exactly what we want, we expect to be about 1% to 2% fuel savings sometime in the year 2020. This was 1980. I'm like, 40 years from now, we might save 1 or 2% in fuel costs on a supercritical inlet design. That didn't excite me. That was not something that I felt like I could really, get heavily into. But that little picture of this super cool research project, but it was on the big picture, was just this ridiculous goal. So that explains why I'm not there anymore, for one thing anyway, and I certainly didn't have any desire to spend my whole career chasing something so, as I see it, insignificant. But listen, I hope that guy was still working on it. I haven't kept up with him. And now we're past 2020. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe it's happening and they got met their goal anyway. But, there's all types of people and good. But listen, I'm afraid that many of us don't see the big picture in church either, that we sometimes we come to church because it's what we've done. We've gotten used to it, and we've kind of get into the routine, and so we come to church and we do the church thing and all that kind of stuff, but we kind of miss out on really the big picture of that. And so that's what I'm really excited about this particular parable, because I think it's going to help us give some new understanding, or maybe not new, but at least refresh that and stuff. Because I get it. Sometimes we just say I love Jesus and we want to do whatever, and that's great and stuff. But when you really catch a vision of what we are doing and what we're a part of, that we're part of something that's much, much bigger, I just think that's so good and so much better. So anyway, today, like I said, we're going to look at this in this parable. If you have a Bible, or you can look on the screen, or you can get out the church notes that I sent out. We're going to be in Matthew 21. Now, listen, in all of Jesus' parables, and I'm trying to give some explanation about parables as we go through, but in all of his parables, it's very important to identify who or what the things in the story represent, because they are there to represent. They're metaphors for something, and so we need to make sure we have to do that. So I'm going to slow down as I walk through and read this and identify the who and the what in this story as we go along. So here we are, starting in verse 33, and it says, "Listen to another parable. There was a landowner." Now that's God, okay? He's the landowner, who planted a vineyard. Now, a vineyard in this particular case is specifically talking about Israel, but it's really also talking about the home base for the kingdom in this world, right? That's what he's talking about. The vineyard is the sort of home base, which is Israel in this world. And he put a wall around it and dug a wine press in it and built a tower and rented it out to wine growers. Now, who he's renting it out to, of course, are the Israelites, right? And at the time, more specifically, he was renting it out to the Pharisees and the Sadducees. Those are the primary ones, those that were responsible for the work of his work there, that his fruit. And so then it says, and he went on a journey. Now, when it says that the landowner went on a journey, that is known as the concept of a hidden God. In other words, God is sovereign and he's operative in the world, but he is not seen visibly like he was in the Garden of Eden. Now, before the fall, he was walking in the garden. I mean, could you imagine that with Adam and Eve? But he was walking, but after that, after the fall, he is now known as he was the hidden God, the invisible God. And so that's what that's really referring to. Okay, verse 34. When the harvest time approached, that means the time of accountability, right? He sent his slaves to the wine growers to receive his produce, or his servants, whatever your Bible may say. The vine growers took his servants and beat one, and killed another, and stoned a third. Again, he sent another group of servants, larger than the first, and they did the same thing to them. Now, who are the servants who called the wine growers to accountability? They're the prophets. That was a rhetorical question, by the way. They're the prophet. I'm going to give you an actual question in a moment, but that's not it. But they were the prophets. They were killed, like Zechariah, Jeremiah, John the Baptist. Of course, we know about his getting beheaded and stuff. But they were killed. All right, verse 37. But afterward, he sent his son, who, of course, is Jesus. Thank you. When I ask you a question, I'm going to say 99% of the time the answer is Jesus. So you get a free pass on that. I try not to ask you any other questions that don't answer with Jesus. All right, so that's there. To them, so he sent them to him, saying, and he said, they will respect my son. But when the vine growers saw the son, they said among themselves, this is the heir. Come, let us kill him and seize his inheritance. They took him and threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. All right, where did they throw him? Calvary, Golgotha, right? The place where he was crucified outside of Jerusalem. By the way, this is just one more time that Jesus actually predicts his death, and he did that several times. But anyway, here comes the big question. Jesus says this in verse 40. He says, therefore, when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those vine growers? Now, this isn't a question for you. This is a question for the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And what they said, and they gave him the right answer, because listen, they knew the righteousness and justice of God. So they said to him, he will bring those wretches to a wretched end. Now, at this point, it's probably likely they didn't know that it was talking about them. In a moment, they're going to know that it was talking about them, but not right then. So did that happen? Of course it did. I mean, about 35 years after Christ was crucified, the Romans came through Jerusalem and put down a rebellion that was raised up by the church people of that time, the Jewish people at that time. And they virtually destroyed the city and killed almost everyone that was there. They sold the rest of the people into slavery, and Israel did not. This is crazy. From that point on, right? So this is about 70 AD. From that point on until 1948, Israel did not exist as a land country. Did they put it down? Yeah. Pretty significant, right? I mean, you talk about the bring those wretches to a wretched end. That was pretty strong and stuff. And so God, I mean, basically God did not allow them to continue on and stuff. And so that's what took place. And so the second part, though, of this answer is also correct. When they said this in verse 41b, they said, and we'll rent out the vineyard to other vine growers who will pay him the proceeds of the proper seasons. It's interesting that the Sadducees and the Pharisees are listening to this. They certainly understood the law. They understood how to answer it and stuff. Not sure they understood at the beginning, but now they begin to understand. It says so a little bit later, but we're not going to get that far. But Jesus is saying that the Father is going to take the responsibility for the kingdom, take it from them, and give it to somebody else. And it's somebody who's going to be a better tenant, is what it says. It's going to be better in this. Verse 42. Jesus said to them, did you never read the scriptures? And he quotes Psalm 118. The stone, which is the Messiah, right? If you go back to Psalm 118, you'll see this. The foundation that Israel was supposed to be built on and supposed to trust and stuff, that was the stone, which the builders rejected, right? The builders, again, being the Pharisees and Sadducees, the rejection being the cross, of course, that's what took place. This became the chief cornerstone. Wow. Now, what does that mean? It means that the cross is the most horrific way to torture someone, that whole horrific thing became the foundation for the church. Wow. That's amazing how God could take something so heinous, so evil, and build from it something so beautiful. Anyway, this came about from the Lord, and it is marvelous in your eyes. Therefore, I say to you, the kingdom of God will be taken away from you, meaning the privileges that are unique to the Jewish people are going to be removed. The Jews are going to be fired, basically. And now here is the key statement, and don't miss it, and given to a people producing the fruit of it. So God is saying, I'm going to take the Bible, I'm going to take the Messiah, I'm going to take the new covenant of his dwelling in you, the Holy Spirit I'm going to do that, I'm going to pull it from you. He's talking to the people he's doing. He says, I'm going to take that from you. I'm going to pull it from you. You're going to have to sit here on the bench. It's as if they're in a football game, right? It's like, bring in the reliever. I got a righty over here, and they're going to put him in. But you're going to have to sit on the bench because I'm going to give it to the second string player. And who are the second string? Well, the answer is you're looking at many of them right here. That's us. that we were the second string. We're the Gentiles, right? And converted Jews and stuff. And so the believers who belong to the kingdom of God. And we are what is now called in the Bible the church. Ecclesia is what we're called. In a nutshell, Jesus was revealing God's plan to take the responsibility that had been given to the Jewish people, and that is the responsibility to tell the world about God. That's what they had been given. They had been given him. They were the mediators between God and the rest of the world. God tried it without a mediator, right? And we saw what happened. A flood came. The world just fell apart, crumbled apart. So he said, I'm going to start a people group called the Israelites, the Jewish people, and it's going to be the mediator for the world to know God and to learn about God. And so that's what he did. He chose the Jewish people to do that and to be that, and that's the responsibility that he's now taking away from them, and he gives it to the church. He says, okay, you're in. Go, kid. Go, do your thing. So now, at the big picture and stuff is you got to realize we've been given this responsibility. We've been given this responsibility that was once given to them. Now, just before we continue on with talking a little bit more about the church, I want to not cast too negative of a shadow or a statement onto the Jewish people. So I'm going to look real quickly at Romans 11 because I think this will help us understand a little bit more of who we are and where Israel fits into God's plan. Because even though they're sitting on the bench doesn't mean they're out of the game, okay? So here we are. Romans 11, verse 24 says this, for if you, meaning the Roman believers, were cut off from what is by nature a wild olive tree. Now think about your family tree and what Paul is saying, that unless your ancestors are Jewish, your family tree was a wild one. Meaning that God didn't choose them to reveal himself to the world, that they were just free to run wildly after their passions. And that's why our ancestors were wicked and immoral, idol-worshiping barbarians. It's interesting in America, like we like to think that our roots go back to the Puritans, right? There's godly people, and that's where our roots go back to, and the founding fathers and stuff. And I'm talking way before them. There was something way before them that your roots go back to. I know Cindy does all this genealogy. I don't know if you've gotten how far back you've gotten, but man, there was times when every one of you came from a family that had slavery in it, that had evil, idol-worshiping people in it. I mean, we all came from a lot of different things in the background and in our background and stuff. And so that was all part of however far back you have to go to get it. But that's what he's talking about. He says, that's what happened to us. And, again, we like to think it's a little bit different, but that's not what happened. But anyway, we were grafted contrary to nature into cultivated olive trees, meaning God's family. We were cultivated into it. We were grafted into it. I don't know if you're into trees and stuff and how they graft them in, but it's pretty fascinating. But that's what this is talking about, is Israel and the Jewish people were the olive tree that we were all grafted into, the nature of that. How much more will these then that are natural branches be grafted into their own olive trees? Now listen, can a Jewish person be saved? Absolutely. Absolutely, and I'm not going to try to go down all the theology involved in that, but listen, I've actually known several Jewish people that have come to faith in Jesus, and of course the original church was all started by people that came out of the Jewish background and stuff. By the way, the term is, if you don't know this, is a completed Jew. In other words, somebody who now has come to faith in Christ has been completed in their faith. Now, that's what he's talking about. It's verse 25. For I do not want you, brethren, to be uninformed of the mystery, so that you will not be wise in your own estimation. That is a partial hardening. Now, this is what's key. That is a partial hardening has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And so all Israel will be saved. Now, again, we could go into the book of Revelation. We could find out a lot more about this. But what I want you to see is that God's not finished with the Jews. He didn't like just kick them out for good. It wasn't like, when Satan got kicked out of heaven and the angels that went with him, now the demons, They were kicked out for good. That's not what happened. There are still a part of the plan and stuff. There was this, it says, partial hardening going on now, and it will last until the completion comes about. And this is where the fullness of the church age is complete. That's what he's talking about. And again, I don't have time to go into all of it, but God brings the Jews back into prominence in the end. Now, the important thing to realize is that God's plan is to use the church to do what Israel was not doing, was failing to do. And that is, their job was to know God and to make him known to the world. That's it. That was their mission statement. They were to know God, to have this relationship with God, and to make him known to the world. Throughout the Old Testament, we see that at times they did that. But by the time that Jesus came along, they were not doing that very well at all. So where the church, now that's where the church comes in. So if you do a search on the word church, you're going to find, not going to find it in the Old Testament if you do it in the Bible, because it's a New Testament revelation. It's a New Testament entity. In the Old Testament, you can see dozens of prophecies about the cross of Christ and the crown of Christ. But you can't see the distance between the cross and the crown and stuff. My parents, mom's here, of course. My parents used to live in Colorado, and from their house, you could look at the mountain range. If you've ever been out there, it's amazing. It's like the plains just run right into the Rockies, and then they shoot straight up. And you look at the mountain range, and you can see like mountaintops. You can say like, oh, there's a mountaintop, another mountaintop. You think that they're like right behind each other or right next to each other and stuff, because the angle that you're looking at doesn't give you any better perspective than that. And so they look right next to them. But when you drive around and you go over to where they are, and oftentimes you realize that there's this like huge valley, 100 miles or more between this mountain and this other mountain and stuff, but you couldn't see it from the angle that you were looking at and stuff. And so but here's the thing. Think of this as the church. So the first mountain is the cross is on that first mountain. The second mountain has the crown on it. That's when Jesus returns, right? So when you think and you're looking at it, you go, oh, well, here comes the cross. The crown's coming right now, right after. That's what they were thinking back then. But what the truth is, if you go around the mountain, you go, wow, there's 100 miles or more in between these two mountains. That's the church. We're the valley between the cross and the crown. That's where we're at. That's where what we, if you want to look at a metaphor, that's what we look like. Okay, so now let's look back at how this is going to apply to us. First of all, what do most people visualize when they think of the church? Well, it depends on your background, right? I'll say the first one is the building. They think of a building. They say, well, that's where the church is. Do you realize that's one of the reasons we don't like to put our name on the church here? Because I don't want people to say that's the church. The church meets here in the hall, but this is not the church. I don't want you to get confused with thinking that that's church. Now, I'm not against calling a church building a church. I'm just saying it can get messy in us understanding what it is. Or it might be that somebody says, well, they think about the church and think, oh, yeah, that's just a bunch of goody two-shoes that follow a bunch of rules and high morals. And so we connect church with being morality. I don't know if I'm guilty. Used to watch Saturday Night Live a lot. They had somebody on there known as the church lady. You remember the church? I see a few nods about the church lady and stuff. Well, she represented, I think, what a lot of people think of the church. So did that Ned Flanders guy at there in Simpsons. But anyway, we had lots of those. I didn't watch The Simpsons, so I don't know much about him. But I did watch the church lady, and many people thought that she. Well, actually, it wasn't a she; it was a he. It was David Carvey in drag, and so he was a sad representation of it. But for me personally, I struggled with the church. I wasn't a big fan, and partly it's because, when I was a kid, I had a lot of energy, and I was kind of a squirmer and stuff, and so I just had a hard time sitting still. And usually, that meant when I was, squirming or something, I'd get or pinched, but sometime along in the service, and so that it kind of turns you off from it. Not that interested in doing it, but here's the thing. When I was in church as a little kid and I have to go to a big church, because sometimes we'd have to go into big church. And I remember looking, you had this big church down there. And I remember there was this big chair, which the pastor sat in, like king chair, that was up on the stage and stuff. And then there were like some little chairs off to the side. I think there was a minister of music or something like that was in that. Anyway, I remember seeing that, and he would get up and he would talk in a real garbled voice. "Oh, the Lord said," and I'm like, oh, get all kind of freaked out and stuff. But I just remember all of this going on that I wasn't connecting with it, right? And it just seemed like it lasted a couple of days, I don't know, but a 6 and 7 year old kid sitting for a couple of days, you're going to squirm, It's just going to be hard not to do that and stuff. But it just wasn't something I connected with. I mean, the only thing that I really liked about the church back then, we had fans from the funeral home, and I used to like to use the fans. I've often thought, if I knew somebody in a funeral home, I wonder if I could get some fans for our church, because I see some of y'all. Yeah, oh, you do? Okay, well, Cindy, you're on it. Get us some fans, some funeral home fans. I want to put them out and let that happen in our church. But so that was about it. But anyway, listen, the point is that all people have different experiences with church and stuff. And a lot of people my age and younger in particular, we kind of came after the church age when it was, sort of the in thing to be, connected with the church. It became a lot of people questioning things, a lot of people, saying, I don't need that and stuff. And so you kind of get caught up in that and so forth. And a lot of people weren't all that interested in the church and stuff. And so we all kind of just, stepped away from it and just didn't connect, right? And so a lot of us were in that way for one reason or another. And again, I know all of you, and I know some of you have had some similar kinds of stories as I did, and you just wasn't getting connected. So, but here's the deal: this is what the church should be. Forget about all those big chairs and fans and wearing suits and lasting none of all that. It is the purpose of the church is to be a place where we gather together, we join together to grow closer to God and to make Him known to the world. That's it. That's what we have to see and stuff. You see, what we're doing right now is a church service. It's a function of the church, but it's not the church. This is a church service. Don't get that ever mixed up. The church is not an it. It is a what or what. It's a who. The church is a who. We're the bride of Christ, and so you can take away the building, but as long as you have Christ and His people, you have church. By the way, did you know that we didn't start having church buildings until over 300 years after Christ? There wasn't a thing. It was mostly illegal. They were all met in house churches and stuff. So by definition, church is a group of people with a mission to know God and make Him known. Don't get any more fancy or whatever than that. For us now, what I want to do is I want to walk through how that translates into the local expression of the church, because now God has given every church that mission, but every church sort of brings about or has a different expression of what that looks like. And so what I want to do is I want to take a little bit of time. Oh gosh, we're running way out of time. I want to take some time to just talk about some important things, I think, about our church, just to make sure we're all on the same page. So the first thing is, we don't say this as much as maybe I'd like to, but ever since the beginning, I've always said that we are a church, meaning that we are here to lead people to think eternally and to act presently. For us, we want to focus on helping people just slow down enough to consider eternity and the implications of that. In other words, if you believe that there's a continuation of life after your time in this world, then how does that shape what you're doing right now? Right? How does that shape the things that you're doing? The other thing that this ties into the way that we do things is our vision. So we want to walk through what is our vision and how does that get carried out? How does that sort of statement there get carried out in a vision? So the first one, we'll go and just kind of go through these fairly quickly. The first vision, I hope it's, yeah, there it is we want to be a church where people feel welcome. Now, I know that sounds pretty simple, and I know you think that every church probably wants that, and I hope every church does want that. But it's something that is so, so important, and it's so important for us to always remember that, listen, it's never been my vision or dream to be the biggest church. It's never been my vision or dream to be the coolest production and have all the lasers and light shows and all the things. It's never been my vision to have the most church programs that for every group and all that stuff. But listen, it is our vision to be a very warm and welcoming church. And I'm going to tell you, you do that very well. One of the things that I hear from people often when they visit is that they felt welcome, that people actually went and talked to them and not just a general greet and how you doing, kind of passing by. It was genuinely interested in them, and I think it's so important that we keep that in front of us because it is a big part. And so I'm so grateful that so many of you really love welcoming people that you don't know. And I hope you caught that part. I said welcome people that you don't know. You see, we have all week to spend time with people we already know, right? But the only way we're going to be a church where people feel welcome is with everyone who regularly attends, reaches out to the visitors and make them feel welcome. Now, I'm not trying to overwhelm anybody or whatever, but we simply don't want to have a bunch of little groups of friends that hang out together, cliques, if you will, that hang out together on Sunday and don't really pay attention to the other people around them. So the challenge to all of us is, and again, if you don't already do this, but most of you do, make an effort to spend more time with people you don't know on Sunday morning than with people you do know. It's a pretty simple thing. Just say, do I know this person? Do I know that person? It could be somebody that's been going here, but try to, use this time that we have to connect with other people that you may not know all that well. So that's the first challenge or whatever for you to have. At the same time, spend more time with people that you do know on every other day, especially the people who don't belong to a church. I've often said instead of having a bunch of committee meetings from a bunch of different people and all that kind of stuff, I'd much rather you have your neighbor over and have dinner or go for a walk through the neighborhood and talk to people and all that. I mean, it's just how are you going to spend your time? That's the key. You want to spend your time trying to reach and connect with people. All right, so the next thing that I'll put up there is BYOF. Yes, it is a little bit of play on BYOB, I'll be honest. But it means bring your other friends or bring your other family. You can use it however you want to. Bring your other friends. Listen, the best thing that you can do with an unchurched friend is spend time with them. But the truth is that it's sometimes difficult to engage them in a gospel conversation. Not all of us are Steve Sievers, who just talks about Jesus to everybody who walks by in the grocery store and every place else. He's amazing. He's an evangelist, right? But not all of us are quite there. But listen, it's always easy to invite somebody to come to a church service or a home group or something else with you. That's a much easier ask, right? And sometimes you have to ask them more than once, unless they really say shut you down. Say I'm not doing it. But listen, if you feel like this is a place where you want to bring people, you're not going to be embarrassed, you're not going to feel like they're going to be put out or whatever, and hopefully that's the case. Then do that. All right, next part of the vision is to be a place where people can be themselves. That is something that was really, really, really important to me. I unfortunately felt like in some of the church environments that I had been in that there was a lot of pretentiousness. There's a lot of people that weren't authentic, that they acted a certain way in church and then they acted a different way when they weren't in church. And I've said this before, it makes sense because we think that we're part of a group that we've got to, present ourselves in a certain way, and we've got to, look a certain way, and there's things that we'd be embarrassed if people knew and all that kind of stuff. And what I've always tried to tell you is that there's not anything, nothing to be embarrassed. That you are who you are, and God loves you right where you're at. Now, the thing is, he loves you so much he doesn't want to leave you where you're at, but he loves you right there. And so we want to always be a place where people can be themselves. And so if you or somebody you know is struggling with questions and wounds and different things in your life, we want to be a safe place where that they can get help and stuff. Now, you have to do that, you've got to be a place where you can trust that it's safe to do that. You're not going to be judged. You're not going to be embarrassed. You're not going to be anything else that's going to hold you back. And so always remember that we're always wanting to be there for people. Now, maybe you or someone you know has not made a decision about faith, but they have some questions about it. And, church should be a place where they can get answers, honest answers, not something they're being sold. We don't have anything for Jesus. Is not for sale. This is not something you're out there trying to peddle or whatever. You're trying to share the love of Christ and what he has done in your life and what he's done in the life of so many people, that they might see something in that would be different. But ultimately, it's God who's going to be changing their heart, and he just may use you or one of us to speak that. So, but listen, a decision that anybody makes about Jesus, everybody makes a decision about Jesus, but the decision that everybody makes about Jesus is the most important decision they'll ever make in their life. And we want people to be able to make that decision in a healthy, informed way, because it's going to affect their eternity. The fact is, I mentioned this earlier, the fact is everybody does live forever somewhere. That's the truth. That's just the reality. Everybody lives somewhere forever. Unfortunately, I know there are tons of people who are going to spend eternity apart from God because they couldn't figure out some big question about who Cain married, or where the dinosaurs fit in, or why bad things happen to good people, or on and on and on, and they just kind of wallow in like this, I don't know. So they don't want to have anything to do with God, and I think that's tragic, but we have to be a space where people can find their way and stuff. All right, the next thing about the vision, and I definitely got to start wrapping up here, is be a church where believers mature through belonging. And belonging means much more than just attending. If you're a follower of Christ, God has a church home for you, and that church home has a need that only you can fill. Do you know that? That's what the Holy Spirit does, is he's gifting us and connecting us in such a way that we are a body, a family and stuff. The church home has a responsibility to help equip you for ministry, but I'm going to tell you a little secret. If you didn't know this already, one of the main ways that you get equipped is by doing. You'll be surprised what you'll learn and just by stepping out and doing. A few years before we started the church, and I don't have time to go into all these stories, but Jan and I did something in the church we had never done before. We volunteered to teach 4-year-olds. I found out that that's not my giftedness. We had like 20 kids every Sunday, and I had 2 that I was trying to corral and keep them at bay while she was trying to teach the other 18, because these 2 just didn't want to participate. But listen, I learned so much about me and the church in that time. It definitely wasn't a wasted time or anything, but my point is, you got to be ready to step out of your comfort zone if you're going to learn some things about yourself, because we are comfort magnets. We want to go where we're comfortable. Well, that's my giftedness, so I'm going to go and do that. Yeah, it's nice to do how you're gifted and stuff, but also remember, God's called us all to do things. I mean, you may not be gifted in sharing Jesus, but He still called us to share Jesus. You may not be gifted in hospitality, but He's still called us all to be hospitable. You may not be gifted in helping somebody with a problem that they have, but he's called us all to help with the problems that we have. So we have to be aware of that. And listen, a big part of growing in your faith is moving out of being a taker, going, instead of, you don't go just to say, what am I going to get out of this? That's the way I used to be when I go to church. I say, what did I get out? Well, the music was pretty good, and I learned a few things in the lesson and stuff. Well, listen, it was a big step, a big movement when I moved from being a taker to being a giver. From being a consumer, I'm consuming, feed me. I want my reclining chair and my latte right here so I can enjoy this service. We get kind of carried away in how comfortable we want it to be and stuff. Oh, I'm not doing that. That's not me. I'm telling you, you've got to be just open to whatever God may be calling you to step out, being somebody who steps out of their comfort zone and stuff. And as we enter into this new school year, I hope that things start happen around here that you're like, oh. And many of you have come to me and said, listen, hey, we don't have like an org chart that we've got blank spots that I'm going to be up here and say, we need somebody for this, we need somebody for that. No, what we need is you to listen to what God says and say, hey, I'd like to talk to you about doing this or talk to that. We want to help. We want to be equipped. I'm going to end with just one real quick analogy. A lot of people have heard the church being described as this. They'll say, the church is a hospital for sinners, not a country club for saints. And that's nice. I mean, I don't want to argue with that. It's certainly not a country club for saints, although we're all saints. You're a saint, but that's not what it's intended to be. However, I want to go one step further and say that the best analogy of the church to me is a military base. Because, think about it. On the military base, what's happening on the military base? First of all, you're being prepared for the war that's outside the base. Believe me, there's a war outside of our base. A spiritual war that is raging out there. And so you've got to be prepared. You've got to be equipped to handle that. And the way God equips us is in lots of different ways. But it's so if you think about it as a military base, it's a place where you come for equipping to be able to go into the war outside, the spiritual war outside. But guess what? Also on that military base, you know what else is there? An infirmary, right? So if you are hurting, if you are sick, if you are been wounded and having a hard time being a warrior, then the church should be that too. There's an infirmary to be able to visit and to be able to go to and to get the help that you need for that. So think about just the military base when you think about the church. It's by far the best analogy that I've ever come up with and ever thought of, because when we come together, we are equipping one another. We're coming together to be preparing ourselves to go into the world around us that is not friendly. It's evil, and there's all kinds of things. Now, don't get me wrong. You may have a next door neighbor, they don't care anything about church and may be the nicest person in the world. Granted, that's true. I'm just saying, in general, what you're going to be facing, though, is a lot of, and let me tell you, that person can also be very detrimental to your faith, because all of a sudden you get kind of lulled into saying, well, then I'm just going to hang out with them and do this, and now they begin to influence you away from God rather than you influence them toward God. So don't avoid them, but always be asking yourself that question: who's influencing who in this relationship? And so the bottom line is, we're in this for equipping. We're in this to be joined together, to be growing, to belonging, so that we can mature in our faith, grow closer to God, so that we might share Him with others. Let's pray.